coming up on The World today. 2 persons killed after shooting in central Paris. Russian Belarusian troops forge on with joint military drills in Belarus. Freezing weather causes chaos across the United States. Now, at least 3 people have been killed after a gunman opened fire near a Kurdish cultural center in Paris. The prosecutor's office says 4 others have also been wounded. Multiple gunshots were fired in the Rue de Gien, a street lined with small shops and cafes in the capital's 10th arrondissement, sowing panic. A suspect, aged 69, was quickly arrested, and it soon emerged he had been freed from prison recently. There is no confirmed motive for the shooting, but Paris prosecutor confirmed that the suspect had previously been charged with racist violence. That incident, in which he attacked tenants at a migrant camp in Paris with a sword, took place at Bercy on the 8th of December 2021. It was not clear why he had recently been released. A French serial killer known as the Serpent, convicted of several tourist murders in Asia in the 1970s, has been released from a Nepalese prison. The 78-year-old Charles Sabraj was freed after a court ruled in favor of his age and good behavior. He spent 19 years in jail in Nepal for killing 2 North Americans in 1975. Sabraj, whose story was covered in the TV drama The Serpent, had preyed on mostly young Western backpackers on the hippie trail in India and Thailand. The notorious killer had been concurrently serving 2 sentences, each 20 years, in Nepal's capital, Kathmandu, for a 1975 murder. Nepal's Supreme Court ordered Sabraj's release on Wednesday after his legal team successfully filed a petition claiming he should be given a concession on his prison term due to health reasons. And Japan is lodging a diplomatic protest after North Korea launched at least 1 ballistic missile eastwards today. Vice Defense Minister Toshiro Ino told reporters in Tokyo that the missile was launched eastwards from near North Korea's capital, Pyongyang, at around 4:31 p.m. local time, flying around 300 kilometers at a maximum altitude of about 50 kilometers, about 31 miles. North Korea has conducted an unprecedented number of missile tests this year, including an intercontinental ballistic missile, ICBM, capable of reaching the U.S. mainland despite international bans and sanctions. In November, North Korea test-fired an ICBM that Japanese officials said had sufficient range to reach the mainland of the United States, and that landed just 200 kilometers off Japan. And to health, where dozens of body bags pile up at a Chongqing funeral parlor in China, even as the country reported no new COVID deaths. This video released Thursday showed nearly 30 body bags, some placed in green stools waiting a loading bay in the Jiangguan funeral parlor in Chongqing. China is battling a growing outbreak, and this video, the video that is sparking criticisms of its virus, which is accounting as the capital braces for a surge of cases. China is expecting a peak in COVID-19 infections within a week, with authorities predicting extra strain on the country's health system, even as they downplay the disease severity and continue to report new deaths. A suicide car bomb at a checkpoint in Pakistan's capital of Islamabad has killed 1 police official and injured several others. Islamabad police official says there was a man and a woman in the car and the man blew himself up during a body search. The car, which was packed with explosives, was headed for a high-value target in the capital. The bombing took place near police headquarters on a main road that leads to government buildings housing the country's parliament and high offices. Pakistani Taliban, who have been waging a campaign of bombings and suicide attacks for over a decade, have claimed responsibility for the car bombing, saying it was revenge for the killing of one of their leaders. And strikes by Border Force staff at UK airports could go on for months unless the government enters talks over pay. This according to the head of the PC's union, Mark Sewotka, who says the union had a mandate for walkouts up until May. Thousands of travellers arriving in the UK have been told to expect delays over Christmas as border staff walk out. Border Force is the latest sector to stage industrial action over pay, jobs and conditions. Well, other walkouts that are scheduled over the next few days include postal workers, rail strikes. We also understand that employees are walking out at Heathrow, Gatwick, Manchester, Birmingham, Cardiff, Glasgow airports, as well as the ports of Newhaven. Military personnel and civil servants have been drafted in to cover strikes. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said he was sad and disappointed about widespread strike action across various industries, but insisted refusing to negotiate on public sector pay, saying it's the right thing in the long term to curb inflation. And we're off to Germany, where come January 1st, the country will have a new supply chain act in effect. The goal is for companies to have tighter control over their supply chains to make sure that products are not made by child laborers and that certain environmental guidelines are also followed. I'm now being joined on this by Deutsche Welle correspondent Lars Holters. He joins me from Berlin. Hi, Lars. Worldwide, there are 25 million people doing forced labor and about 80 million child laborers. Will the new Supply Chain Act put a stop to this?
No, it will not put an end to this, but it will certainly improve the situation. It will make sure that companies pay closer attention to human rights standards, to environmental standards, and of course to labor standards in countries where they produce. And it ideally protects people there. We have seen many examples in recent years of German companies working in regions where those standards were not very high. One of the biggest stories here, Volkswagen had to explain their business in China's Xinjiang province, where thousands of Uyghurs are working in forced labor camps. It's also widely known that the textile industry is highly problematic. Also, of course, the agricultural sector. Take Africa, for example. In Ghana or Ivory Coast, children are working on cacao farms. There's children working in fishing in Uganda. There's children working in mines in Tanzania. And now with companies here in Germany being forced to have a closer look and to cut off suppliers who don't adhere to certain standards, that would ideally lead to change in those countries.
Is this law strong enough?
Most experts say it's a good law because it tells companies that they are indeed responsible for their entire supply chains and that they can't look away any longer and just blame suppliers far away for circumstances that they, of course, in the end benefit from, with lower prices, of course, for example, in manufacturing. Now, one problem of the law certainly is that in this case it only applies to Germany, and there have been efforts in the past to strengthen EU supply chain rules as well. But those efforts have not yet led to new legislation. And if we know anything about politics in Brussels for the European Union, it will take longer to put that into effect because it's, of course, not just one country's governments, but the governments of the entire bloc that has to okay those rules.
What does this all mean for businesses? How hard is it for them to abide by the new rules?
Well, it definitely won't be easy. Supply chains can be really long and complicated in this globalized world, but companies, of course, have to do due diligence, and they can also ask their suppliers to do the same. And if there are regions where certain minimum standards aren't ensured, then a company may just decide to leave that region and maybe search for suppliers elsewhere. Now, for most products, that should be possible, of course. Also, as much as it might not be an easy task to keep tighter control of a company's supply chain, some businesses have actually said that they also see it as an opportunity. And that is because consumers are now setting certain standards, have begun to hold companies accountable to higher standards. There's a growing segment of the population that puts a premium on ethical standards. For example, think of people who don't want to buy a shirt that is made by children or by women who have to work for 15 hours a day and sleep under a desk in an overcrowded factory. These are issues consumers are caring about. And so for companies cleaning up their supply chains can, after all, have a positive effect.
Indeed, many thanks, Lars Holter, Berlin Deutsche Welle correspondent there, joining me from Berlin, and happy holidays. A deep freeze enveloped most of the United States early today, combined with a massive winter storm brewing in the Midwest. Two-thirds of the nation is under extreme weather alert. And experts are warning that plunging temperatures wreaking havoc across the U.S. and Canada can lead to frostbite on bare skin in only 5 to 10 minutes. Wind whipped flags and snow came down hard in Paducah, Kentucky, as utility crews worked to plow parking lots. Heading into the Christmas holiday weekend, the looming storm brings with it blinding snow from the northern plains and Great Lakes region to the upper Mississippi Valley in western New York, while significant icing from a separate Arctic blast hit the Pacific Northwest. In Portland, Oregon, a resident used a credit card to scrape ice, as you can see there, from their car windows. Some weather conditions. Who are joining us now is our Washington, D.C. correspondent, Maria Bird. Hello, Maria. Do help us understand the severity of the weather situation.
Hello. Yes, this is quite severe and quite unprecedented. This time of year, it's a little chilly, but it's not quite this frigid temperatures. And obviously, as you mentioned, the storms, the snowstorms that have hit many parts of the United States. Here in Washington, we've had more rain, but this morning we did begin to see snow as well. But this has impacted so much during this holiday season.
And we understand 135 million people are set to be under weekend alerts ahead of the Christmas weekend. Tell us about that. Thousands of flights also canceled?
Yeah, so there are, as you mentioned, millions that are under this alert. And so what it means, they have to not only think about preparing for the Christmas holiday, but preparing their homes for this type of frigid temperature. Oftentimes, you have to turn off the water on the exterior of your home to ensure there's no freezing of pipes. You also have to ensure that, obviously, for your own safety, when you do go out, you have thermal clothing on that does allow you to be protected from the very cold temperatures. And so it's a lot of preparation around these type of temperatures that goes far beyond just kind of staying off the roads. But that will keep people off the roads as well. It will definitely change many people's travel plans. Many people are going to have to stay where they are instead of maybe traveling to where they had planned for the holiday season. And so this is quite a challenge for those who are looking to travel, whether it's by air, plane, or rail.
And I know that, some of these travel plans could have been made way earlier in the year, so that just might be a whole lot of disappointment, especially for those who now have to perhaps stay back in the region, and they were probably trying to avoid the cold in the first place. But what are the areas, the cities, the states to watch out for with these extreme conditions?
The Midwest is a huge area. Also, if you look at areas like Kentucky, as you mentioned, Colorado's been hit quite heavily. Kansas City, Missouri has been hit with temperatures almost below zero by 20 degrees. And so, there's quite a few states across that region that have been hit with this storm that I think was definitely unexpected. You can even look at the southern region, the Georgia area, it's experiencing frigid temperatures and lots of precipitation there as well. And so this is going to definitely, I think, be long lasting through almost a new year. So much of the end of 2022 will be filled with frigid temperatures and a lot of snowstorms.
Is this a regular, or can one say that climate change is also responsible?
This is definitely probably going to directly relate to climate change once we kind of get through this. I'm sure there will be conversations around that and discussion points because it's a bit early. It just became winter yesterday, the 2 days ago, the 21st of December. And so we're very early in the winter season to see this type of severe weather.
With experts warning that plunging temperatures could lead to frostbite, how are people protecting themselves?
Well, we briefly talked before yesterday's show about the homeless. They are probably the number one constituency group that is most vulnerable when we have these type of frigid temperatures, because you have to have thermal wear, you have to have several layers of clothing on to protect yourself from frostbite. You also have to ensure you have the appropriate gloves, hats, boots, something that is very tough and sturdy, that not only is warm in the inside, but also protects the exterior so that you don't get any type of wet from the snow, because once your limbs get wet and they get cold, that's how you can get frostbite. And so it's a dangerous trek to go out in temperatures that are below 20 and also snowstorms.
So what do you think this Christmas would be like?
I think it'll still be filled with a lot of love and joy. It'll just be with whoever is at one's home and where they are. And so it'll be a much greater focus on family and togetherness, trying to stay warm, which means it'll be tight-knit time.
I'm sure, Maria, you also have plans, holiday plans. Thanks again for joining me, and happy holidays.
Thank you.
Well, let's go on to other stories. Acting Director of the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs, Nicholas Hedman, says that China's space station presents an opportunity for international cooperation in space. Well, this comes as the crew of the Shenzhou 15 approaches its first month aboard the Tiangong space station. The crew members, Fei Junlong, Deng Kunming, and Zhu Zhang Lu, were sent into space in late November and are working aboard China's nearly completed 3-module space station. We go on to other stories. The earlier story, which we mentioned to you, strikes by Border Force staff at UK airports having to go on for months. We understand other walkouts are scheduled over the next few days, including postal workers' rail strikes. In fact, today, some of them started their strike. Well, to talk more about this, we have joining us Mr. Neru Ugujabo, Senior Strategy Advisor, Prince's Trust, is also a former advisor to former UK Prime Minister Theresa May. He joins me now on the situation. Welcome to the program. If you can hear me, could you unmute? And I'm going to, ask you the first question. If you could just unmute. The Christmas holidays are here, and apart from railway workers, which have brought the transportation network to a standstill, Border Force staff started today, followed by postal workers, bus drivers. It's like civil servants are either in the middle of a strike action or threatening to go on strike. Could you give us an idea of what's happening?
Well, I think there's quite a range of challenges across the board. It's almost tantamount to a general strike because the number of sectors involved are quite significant. And we're talking about critical infrastructure, railways, we're talking about healthcare, and we're talking about civil servants and so on. I think the genesis of the crisis is primarily the recent cost of living crisis where we've seen inflation rising above 10%. We've seen energy prices skyrocketing, and people's wages simply are not meeting up with their expenses. So this is why there's been strikers, workers leaving their workplace in order to strike. And the government essentially has, I suppose, made it very difficult for negotiations to take place, not wanting to participate and not encouraging settlements amongst the union. There's been a lot of very difficult political environment for settlements to be reached. So that's why the situation is as bad as it is currently.
For you, have you been directly affected, and how do you think people in the UK are being affected by this general strike?
I think we're all affected. One of the clear things you can see is that there are significantly more cars on the roads. And that means people are obviously recognizing that the strikes, the train strikes in particular, are going to affect journeys, particularly during Christmas time, where people are traveling to different locations across the country to spend time with their family members. You can definitely see an increase in traffic. But of course, just the normal fear that people have about if you need healthcare, if you need an ambulance, what might that look like for you if the strikes are happening in your particular patch of the country? So I think people are worried. And of course, in terms of other aspects as well, when you think about strikes on trains means that people who would normally come into London to work are not able to do so. So that's impacting on them. People who are doing activities like football matches, traveling to football matches or traveling to see family members and so on, all of that have been absolutely disrupted. So it does have an impact on practically everybody across the country.
A lot of disruptions, but when you look at the health sector, this week nurses staged their biggest walkout in decades, and then on Wednesday paramedics began theirs in many parts of England in a particular bitter dispute, one would call this. This further brings turmoil to an already ravaged public health system. One wonders how did things get this bad?
Well, the thing is that we've been facing quite a number of challenges for quite a while. If you think back, obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic made it incredibly difficult for the health service. They struggled quite a bit to tackle the number of cases, the number of people within the hospitals. There were issues around the availability of equipment, particularly PPE, for the safety of nurses and so on. And of course, the government tried to build Nightingale hospitals across the country, which eventually were not used. So the health service was already significantly stretched, with people unable to see their GPs and so on across the country. So the situation was already bad. And I think this will make it significantly worse. So you're talking about a health service that was already struggling with a huge backlog, now having to cope with nurses striking and other health workers striking, ambulances striking. And with I suppose the promise of more strikes to come in the new year, it seems to me that the NHS is going to face significant difficulty. And I can see that the government, perhaps their approach have not been helpful so far, but are beginning to say the right things and hopefully looking forward to much more settlement-oriented talks in the new year.
But are we sure about that? Because seeing this collection of disputes across, the different sectors, we heard the NHS Health Secretary saying that, in the case of the NHS, he said, he's quoted to have said that it is a conscious choice to inflict harm on patients.
Well, this is part of the problem. So the rhetoric from the government all along have not been positive, in my view, and in the views of many people across the country. But I think when the reality begins to bite and individuals who are affected will be writing to their members of parliament and writing to the prime minister and other ministers. I think that will change in due course. And of course, with the strike, that's the calculation of the people who are striking. These are critical services, and it is not possible to allow this situation to continue. So I think the government will have to change its approach and to find a solution to what is fast becoming a major crisis in the country.
I know you've mentioned the effects of COVID-19 pandemic, but perhaps Brexit further complicated the economic problems, or some who have pointed to more recent instability at the heart of government, Britain on its fifth prime minister in 6 years, the disastrous financial program unveiled by ex-Prime Minister Liz Truss, all culminating into where we are today, do you think?
Well, yes, I think there's no doubt that the UK is plagued with a number of very significant issues. So we have COVID-19, we have the war in Ukraine, and of course, Brexit is the elephant in the room that the government perhaps doesn't want to quite talk about. But there is no doubt that it's had significant impact in many different ways. So if you think about the relationship between Britain and the European Union, we simply had free trade and free movement of people across the continent. But having left the European Union, Britain is now struggling with supply issues, both in terms of people providing their services to the European Union, but also in terms of receiving goods to the UK. So this has really compounded the problems here, and I think have contributed quite significantly to the cost of living crisis, which is what's driving the strikes.
But then government is also under pressure, aren't they? And this is working with the resources that they have and the current situation, some of which you've mentioned.
Yeah, government is under pressure, but the reality is that with a lot of these issues is about political decisions, which is why this is such a tense situation, because people believe the government is acting in the interest of ideology rather than the interest of the country. And I think nurses in particular feel this intensely because, of course, the government led the praise of nurses for the work that they did during COVID-19, the clap for nurses days that we had in the UK, where the whole country basically clapped for the contribution of healthcare workers. But now that they are demanding some pay rise in order to be able to cope with the increase in inflation and the cost of living crisis, they feel that the government is not responding appropriately. So essentially in the UK, there's pressure all around, and it is a real difficulty to see how we're going to get out of it.
What do you recommend as ways to boost public sector confidence in the future?
Well, I think it's a very challenging situation. My view is that it is likely to end up in a general election because people feel that these are political situations which need to be resolved. But ultimately, government has to be part of the conversation in talking to striking workers, and both sides have to meet in the middle somewhere, that's so that we can move forward to build and to grow the economy.
And perhaps a more personal question, how will this affect you and your celebrations for Christmas?
Well, it's been a hard 2 years, so we'll do our best to still enjoy a good Christmas dinner. But I think from my perspective and what I can see, there are a lot of people who are significantly affected, and we're doing our best to support those around us to make sure that they can enjoy a good Christmas.
We appreciate your time on the program. Many thanks, Mr. Nehru Nwujabo, a former advisor to ex-UK Prime Minister Theresa May. Thank you for joining me on the program, and happy holidays.
Thank you very much.
Welcome back, and we're here in Africa, where inspired by ancient Egyptian civilization, Tutera, an Egyptian company, is reliving the past through a virtual world. In cooperation with Cube Consultants, an architectural visionary studio, Tutera has launched a Metatut, the first Egyptian virtual city on the metaverse. Take a look.
The idea of the city depends on an imaginary assumption that King Tutankhamun came back to life in 2022 to complete what he dreamed of accomplishing in Egypt, but this time through the virtual world.
After the 100th year anniversary of the discovery of the Tutankhamun tomb, we thought of establishing a platform that enables people to visit and interact. They can interact by watching the ancient Egyptian civilization, listening to historical stories, and touring the city.
The project, which is the first of its kind in Egypt, according to Tutera CEO, was first announced on the 4th of November 2022 to mark the 100-year anniversary of the discovery of the tomb of Tutankhamun.
As the first company to think of this idea in Egypt, we believe that we're not lagging behind the world in terms of technology.
In Metatut, visitors can travel through time and space, entertain and interact with others in the virtual space.
The spaces are currently open, and the Valley of the Kings, Sun Chamber, Akhenaten Palace, and Magical Melody Chamber, and people can visit at any time. There are other soon-to-be open spaces. Among them are the Nefertiti Palace and its Glory Hall. And there are other events that we will create, but the spaces are still under development and design.
Visitors can explore the world of Metatut not only by using VR headsets, but also through laptops, tablets, and mobile phones. Egypt's boy king Tutankhamun has gripped imagination since his tomb was discovered in 1922. He lived in turbulent times and died of causes still disputed in about 1322 BC at only 18, having reigned for 9 years.
So instead of robotics and space, it's going back to the past. Well, let's bring you more stories. Although street vending is outlawed in Zimbabwe as dusk descends on Harare, the capital, informal traders can be seen hawking a wide range of goods. The southern African country is battling an extended economic crisis marked by high inflation and unemployment, which is blamed on the government's violent seizure of Caucasian-owned farms, mismanagement, and also corruption.
A steady stream of homebound workers flows from Harare's central business district into a sea of informal traders, selling everything from basic foodstuff and clothes to electronic devices. Many of Zimbabwe's urban poor battle to survive the economic crisis by selling various goods in informal pop-up street markets, where they are frequently raided and dispersed by police. As formal stores struggle to keep up with inflation, rentals, and other high business costs, informal traders often undercut their prices and eat into their market share. 27-year-old father of two, Byron Munangati, takes his place among hordes of vendors who invade Harare city center each night to evade the police. The night traders also target bargain-hunting commuters heading home from work.
They come here because our merchandise is cheaper. I expect better sales during Christmas holidays. People have a propensity to spend on groceries and other things.
Tino Tenda, a 21-year-old clothing vendor, says he makes more money selling at night than during the day.
In the afternoon, there are constant battles with police, so selling at night helps.
College student Obert Chinganyama has just struck a bargain for a pair of trainers. He says street vendors offer bargains he cannot get in formal stores.
I come to the streets because I can negotiate the price. These sticker dealers are willing to reduce the price always.
Although Zimbabwe is a long way off the 500 billion% hyperinflation reported by the International Monetary Fund in December 2008, the country still has the highest inflation in the world, measured at 255% in November. Even though the country has reintroduced its own currency after it was destroyed by hyperinflation, most of the street trade is in US dollars, which the country adopted in 2009.
Now to the holidays. At a refugee camp in southern Chad this week, around 300 children got to share in the global Christmas spirit thanks to a visit from Santa Claus. Displaced by conflicts across Central Africa, many of the children living there in a refugee camp never had the chance to celebrate the holiday. But thanks to a Christmas tree ceremony organized by the World Bank, this has come to fruition.
Henriette Bachman, who was forced to flee her home in the Central African Republic in 2017, is overjoyed to bring her son, Edward, to the ceremony.
Even though I don't have a Christmas present for my child this morning, I said I will clean him up, dress him, and will bring him to the Christmas tree ceremony. I will be very happy that he will have a Christmas present this year because he has never had one since we took refuge in this camp almost 6 years ago.
According to United Nations figures, Chad itself, one of the poorest countries in the world, hosts more than 600,000 refugees in camps along its borders with Sudan, Central African Republic, Nigeria, and Cameroon. Looking ahead, Chad is likely to receive more inflows of refugees given the risk of political instability in all its neighboring countries, according to the UN and World Bank's Joint Data Center. This week's celebration in Dembo is organized by the World Bank's Refugees and Host Family Support Project. It provides basic needs to refugees and works to expand education and health services in camps.
The lives of children in refugee camps are not easy. They're traumatized. They live very difficult lives in these times. So this ceremony, I had the idea to organize it to bring the joy of love so they can feel loved and so they can relive Christmas like the other children across the world.
In addition to a visit from Santa Claus, who comes bearing gifts for the children, the Christmas tree ceremony features traditional song and dance routines from the children themselves, including Banton's son, Edward. The pair beamed with joy after Edward received his gift, his first since entering the camp.
Now, there's a scuba diving Santa Claus spotted hours ago in Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary, enjoying some relaxation with an elfish helper before the upcoming holidays. Propelled by an undersea scooter, the Jolly St. Nick delivered a bit of cheer to the marine inhabitants in the sanctuary of Key West, Florida. The essence of the event is to offer underwater holiday photo opportunities and help promote awareness of an annual fundraiser for a local children's charity, Kids in Special Situations. During Santa's sub-sea excursion near an area aptly named Pleasure Reef, Santa encountered schools of fish and other marine life that seemed quite comfortable with the very merry crew throughout the dive. For over 30 years, the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary has protected the continental United States' only living coral barrier reef and the waters surrounding the Florida Keys island chain. Well, here's wishing you as well the very best of the holidays from me and the team here at Channels Television. Thanks for watching The World Today. I'm Melissa.